My name is Justin Kirsch, and I'll be moderating today and participating on the panel. We're going to have some fun talking about cybersecurity and what's been happening this year and last year in cybersecurity. I want to introduce our panelists. Sandra, we just met.
Sandra James with Private Eyes.
And Rob.
Robert Moore with Inventiv Technologies.
All right. So let's get started with a few statistics to kind of warm us up. If you look at what's been happening with cybercrime, it has cost the world $6 trillion in 2021. And when I think about those numbers, what do you guys think about? Like, that's such a big number.
It's huge.
It's like so huge.
It's hard to even imagine how large that is, but what we were talking about yesterday, it's like the third largest GDP.
It's like I think GDP numbers when I'm thinking numbers like this, right? And you're looking at the United States is around 20 trillion. Next is China, and they're catching up fast at about 14. And I think Japan is right behind it at around 5. So this represents a significant number in terms of that, and it looks like it's not slowing down at all. It's estimated to be at 10.5 trillion in the next 5 years. And so if you look at 2015 to 2025, that's a huge jump at 15% a year. I mean, it's probably the greatest transfer of wealth in history. So this is a huge deal worldwide. There's a great slide that kind of I want us all to talk to a minute. What we kind of want to do today is give you some stats that you can take back to your company and train your staff on what's happening in cybersecurity, some questions you can take back to your IT folks. And so we're giving you some tools. At the end of this slide, there'll be a QR code, and you can actually download the slide and use it yourself. Since we don't have internet, I just did a quick video of one of my favorite sites, informationisbeautiful.net. And this is a site that has the world's biggest data breaches and hacks, and it goes from 2004 to now. And all these bubbles are going to pop up here in a second, and it shows the larger the bubble, the bigger the breach. And the more bubbles, the more breaches. And I'm going to scroll down. If you look on the left side of this, you can see the years, and as the years go by, 2004 starts back up, and then it goes down, and you can hover over one of these bubbles and look at the information, statistics on it. You can actually click on it, get a link, and read the article about it, but it's a great visual about how big this is. So what are you guys seeing in terms of how big this is and how it's impacting customers?
Oh, it's getting huge. As we've touched on, it's just exploding exponentially. I think what is somewhat even more scary for us in the mortgage banking industry is that in 2021, there were more hacks on small and medium-sized businesses than there were on large companies. So they are targeting us, IMBs, the financial industry in specifics, because we're less protected than the larger corporations.
Yeah, that's true.
And that's borne out by the statistics from last year.
Yeah, we got to take that seriously. So the next slide, this is a great one, but it kind of puts things in perspective. This is a quote from Warren Buffett, and he thinks that cybercrime is the biggest problem facing mankind. He even goes as far as to say it's a bigger risk than nuclear weapons. And if we look at what's been happening lately and the attacks that we're getting, I think he's right. And I think we've got to take it seriously. Let's take this back to the United States now, okay? We've been talking about the world, but let's look at some statistics, and then we're going to kind of bring it back to the mortgage industry. But the United States between 20 and 21 has seen the greatest increase in breaches. And this is just the reported breaches. So we know that there are more breaches than were actually reported, but at 68%, that's a super big deal. What are you guys seeing in what your customers and who you're talking to, how it's impacting the mortgage industry?
Well, unfortunately for me, probably 2.5 years ago, I didn't even know of any mortgage companies personally that had been hacked. That's not true anymore. So,
Yeah.
Fortunately, it's none of our clients. Knock on wood. We'll try to keep it that way. But I know of several companies that have been hacked, and it's a terrible experience. If I may, a couple of real-world examples. So, mainly, I want to share this with you so that you see the statistics, but they don't always drive it home. So let me tell you how a couple of companies have been impacted. So one independent mortgage banker, decent size, operates in the western U.S., was hacked by ransomware. The bad actors had been on their network for months. They knew the senior management. They knew the owner. Unfortunately, this company had not taken the necessary security measures. They thought they were backed up. They did not have an offline backup. So when the artists encrypted everything, they managed to encrypt all of their backups as well. So they were pretty much left high and dry and forced to pay the ransom. Normally, I'm sure with your company as well, we always refuse to pay, but we generally have our clients set up so we have recourse and alternatives to restore. This company did not. They ended up paying $1.4 million in ransom. So that's a huge hit in and of itself. I can't tell you what the cost is outside of that. They ended up having their imaging database corrupted. So think about that for a second. All of a sudden, you're literally millions of documents are no longer related to a loan ID. So this company had to spend money to manually hire outside people and resources to go back and rebuild the file. So
it not only cost them in paying a ransom, but then there was even more cost in what it took to rebuild their files, not to mention lost business.
Right.
Right.
And then, of course, you've got the reputational risk and loss. And then I will tell you, since I know a number of those employees, there is a human cost to ransomware because of the extra hours, the stress, the headaches, the worry. There's a definite human toll to this besides just the money.
Right, and I would add to that too, is that you have to communicate to any consumers that information was taken in any ransom or anything that happens as well. And I think what you said earlier about small businesses and medium-sized businesses, we probably all know someone that had some type of have had some type of cyber attack of some kind. It could be a small amount or large, which is why the number has grown so much on the chart you just shared.
Yeah, and when you look at it, I would argue that 95% of companies have been hacked in some way, fashion, or form. And they're not being honest that they got it, or maybe they don't know it yet. You said, how long did it take to discover the breach that you were talking about?
They
were in the system for how long?
They were in the system for 5 months.
5 months ahead of that, right.
And they had a traumatic event that triggered it, and 3 days later, they locked everything down.
Yeah, and that's an unfortunate.
Right. And the thing is that there are tools that you can use. So you have to make sure that your IT department, of course, that you know who you're hiring, but that they have the credentials that they state, right? Whoever's going to be in charge of that for you. But there's tools that can easily be provided for any size company to prevent these things from happening, right?
Correct. And what you need to remember is, to your management or to your owner, sometimes that may seem expensive, but it's a lot less expensive than the alternative when you do get hacked.
So this is another slide that brings it home, and I did a video. This is a website that is going to be in the deck that you can look at too. And what's interesting about this one is these are actual live cyber attacks that are happening right now. And this sort of brings it home. I took this video yesterday at around 3 o'clock, and by 3 o'clock, if you look at the upper right-hand side of this slide, it shows there was over 400,000 attacks that have happened since then. And if you look at the bottom part of the right slide, you see that the financial services industry, that's us, the mortgage industry, was hit the hardest. So let's talk about that for a minute. Why are we seeing mortgage industries, and how are they doing it? Why are we seeing this in the mortgage industry? What are you seeing?
Well, I would say the reason that you're seeing more of it is because the mortgage industry has more access to more PII information for every consumer they do a loan for, more than anybody else in the financial sector. So
Yeah,
I think that's the
I
reason
agree
that
with
it probably
yeah.
is happening more.
Absolutely.
Yeah. We're seeing the most interesting phishing and smishing attacks that we've ever, and we're going to get into some of the statistics about that in a minute, but every time someone clicks on an email that they shouldn't and it looks super legitimate, they end up having to ask themselves, is this real, something I need to do to get my job done or not? And we're going to talk about ways that we can help those folks out. But do you have any specific examples, good ones that you've seen lately?
Of phishing?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, it was a phishing attack that
Oh, wow.
affected that independent mortgage banker. Another example, we picked up this client after the incident and helped remediate, but they were a private money lender, so their investor relations manager is one of those chronic clickers.
Yep.
And so she clicked, allowed the hacker to get her credentials. He again resided on the system for, best guess, we figured at about 6 months. And then he impersonated the investor relations manager, set up rules in Outlook to divert the emails from a particular investor, and then instructed that investor to wire funds to the tune of $500,000.
Yeah.
And they had cyber insurance, so they got that money back, but I will tell you it took almost 7 months for the cyber insurance provider to pay that. So keep that in mind. You know, you're going to, even with cyber insurance, you're going to have some gaps to fill.
Yeah.
And I can think,
Yeah.
I could
Go ahead.
add a couple too, is that because the emails, it's really important. I have a few examples of someone that was impersonated through email. And so you have to train your employees how to look to see if it's not the person. So anytime you have an employee that's told to wire money, they should always get a verbal confirmation from the person that is asking him to do it. I mean, it's a simple thing to do, but I know companies that have had, thousands of dollars wired and not be able to get the money back because the employee thought it came from a directive from their boss or someone above them, and it was a scam. So there's so much of that happening.
Yeah, I'm seeing the same thing, and they're getting more and more sophisticated in how they're sending these emails. What they really do is they first steal somebody's credentials to their email account, and then, because the phishing attacks that come from Gmail, those are pretty easy. A little training and you can let people know in the email systems today, if they're configured correctly, will actually tell you this is from outside of your organization. Right. And if you're not seeing that in your email, someone hasn't configured it correctly. But the ones that are most worried about are the ones that are someone that you work with on a regular basis, or a trusted vendor that's been hacked. And if you look at some of the stats on those, that's why phishing and ransomware, which Rob was just telling us, we'll see a stat in a minute, ransomware is mostly comes through email too. So when we're looking at stats like this, you're seeing that phishing is the number one, and it's somehow involving email too.
Yes, and the examples I can think of were all emails where someone said that they were told to wire money to buy a piece of equipment.
Yep.
And the money was just gone as soon as it's sent. So a confirmation is what's really important.
The one that I've seen the most effective is when someone says, oh, you're due a refund of such and such from a trusted vendor, and then you click the site to go get your refund, and then they say, oh, log into your Microsoft account, and it looks just like a Microsoft account, and you give up your password right there, and then you're done. And this was the stat, Rob, that I was telling you about, the ransomware you were telling me about. It's estimated that 94% of ransomware arrives via business email. So between the phishing and the ransomware, email is a very important thing to get locked down. because those guys are after your usernames and passwords. Any other interesting ones that you guys have seen about phishing attacks? Any other?
Those are the worst ones I have.
Okay.
So
Okay.
Those are some big
I don't want to
ones.
depress anybody anymore.
Right.
Another one that what I saw is it came pretending to be a help desk service that this mortgage company was used to, and they send a link and say, click here and we'll connect to your computer, but they have them do a phone call first, okay? So it's sort of this setup with a phone call first, and they don't even give you the link to click until after you're talking to them on the phone, and so it kind of bypasses your thinking, and you're thinking, oh, I'm on the phone with a tech support group. And what they do is they remote control your computer, okay? And then they're in your computer, and they've put some sort of device on it so that when you're away from your computer, you've left it on, they can come back, they can clone your entire computer, they can bring it back to where they're doing it,
Wow.
and then they go into the web browser and they get all the passwords that you've been saving in that web browser, and they unencrypt them in about 3 minutes. And so those are the sort of things that you got to look for and that I'm seeing with our customers.
I want to point out one other thing. You know, we've talked about how, you know, the title of this is How Are They Innovating? So there's a number of ways. There's ransomware as a service now, God forbid.
Yes.
You and I could set up as ransomware artists in no time at all. It's just crazy. But one of the things that they're starting to do, encrypting the data and forcing you to pay is not enough. So they're doing what we call double dipping. So in order to drive home the threat and make the threat more real, they are exfiltrating all of your data. So all of that PII data that we as mortgage bankers have, they're taking it and removing it from your servers, your databases, and then they threaten you with releasing that into the public. So the threats are double.
And if you don't pay, you get put on the wall of shame, right? Which there are websites that
And
these
there goes your
hackers,
reputation.
are putting out there, you pay or we're going to put you on the wall of shame, and everybody's going to know we've got your data. And then they're going to release it publicly on the dark
Right.
web. So I'm going to tie this now into the mortgage industry a little bit more, but we're all worried about inflation right now, and it's run away. Well, cyber inflation is happening too, and the average cost of a data breach has gone up by 10% between last year and this year. And the average cost is about $4 million now. But there's an interesting twist to this cost. The new era of work from home, which all of us in the mortgage industry have found ourselves in suddenly, actually adds another $1 million. So add another 25% to that if you've got folks that are working from home, because a breach in that area is even more important. So let's talk about that for a minute. The era of working from home. We got to really trust those folks, because we can't have them in the office. We're not keeping an eye on them. What are we doing differently now to help that?
Well, I think the key is obviously you have to make sure they don't have any history of, before you bring them on them if you can, but of doing anything that would impact your business, obviously. But I think that the other thing is that you have to use the tools that are available to manage what people are doing remote, what they can access, what they can save, and what tools you give them, and then how you keep that information secure.
Yeah.
And every industry has had it, but as I said earlier, is that the mortgage industry has the most PII because of the information a consumer has to give to get a mortgage loan today.
It does. It absolutely does.
Everything is there.
Rob, what are you seeing in the work from home?
Well, it's important that every organization, their IT department, extend their protection to these endpoints. And so that attack area, has increased exponentially. So there are additional tools of endpoint detection and response. You have extended detection and response tools that you can put on there. So it's important that you add those. There's some relatively newer technology that has become big for us, which is called virtual desktop infrastructure, and it's much more protected. It's a virtual desktop that connects to your virtual servers in the cloud, extremely protected. I have a mortgage client that's using it with their outsourced resources in the Philippines. So
absolutely.
it's very reliable. It's also cool, I was sharing this with Sandra, when you have remote, I don't know if you guys are experiencing this, but some of my clients are frustrated because they're having downsizing or they're having people move to other companies that are remote and they can't get their laptops, monitors, all of that back. So they're actually out a decent amount of money. With the virtual desktop, you can allow them to use their devices, still be secure, or you can even use a smart client, which is a lot less expensive, and it's probably okay just to expense that.
Yeah, I want to emphasize virtual desktops are probably the most secure way, but most end users don't like being trapped in a virtual desktop. They want to be on their local computer. And so some of the solutions that are available for that in a bring your own device era can be configured so that you can protect the business data on those computers and make certain that it's protected even if you're not controlling the device. The ultimate thing that you have to know is what are your risks. And one of the human factors of this that I've seen is people are not as careful when they're working from home. Don't know exactly why that is. Maybe there's a distraction, but we're seeing
It's
more
because
people.
there were 3 kids demanding your attention and 2 dogs.
Yeah.
And somehow you're just not as focused.
Yeah, it's different. The work from home
Right.
environment is definitely different. And so we need, and there's some advice we're going to have at the end of this that I think can help some awareness that we'll talk about and how to do that too. So if you look at, and Sandra was just saying this, what kind of data are they after and where are we seeing these breaches? Social Security numbers are the #1 target in data, and that's what everybody wants.
Right.
And what do we have?
Everything.
A lot of
That
Social
and
Security numbers, right? I mean,
Yeah.
we've probably got more, like you said, than anybody in the industry. And if you look at what it costs a mortgage company when they get hacked, it's about $180 a record. So if you want to bring this home to see what your real risk is, look at the number of records that you have on your system. Don't just think about the number of loans you've closed. Think about the number of loans you've looked at, the number of loans you've denied. All of that is sitting in those records, and then multiply that by the number of years that you have it, and that's your number right there. So I would say even for the smallest company, you add a couple of zeros to that 180, and you're not going to get out of it for less than that. Most companies are going to be higher than that. What are you guys seeing with PII, and how do we protect that?
Well, go ahead.
No, you go
No,
first.
go.
Go ahead.
Well, this just takes me back to the insurance thing that you brought up earlier about cyber insurance and what it will pay and what it won't. It's really important that you read your policy and make sure that you're doing the things that your insurance policy requires you to do so that if an incident does occur, that they'll pay. Because otherwise you might have an issue there. And so they ask you a lot of questions when you're applying for the insurance, and you want to make sure that if they ask if you're doing something, that you have a policy in place and that you're following that.
Yeah, let's
protect
talk
it.
about, let's talk about cyber insurance. It's super popular right now. Everybody wants it. It used to be really cheap. It's getting more expensive now,
Cost has went
but
up.
there's some gotchas with it, right? So let's talk about some of those, Rob. What are,
Well, first and foremost, you've got to read your policy, read the fine print.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many people I've helped or talked to that are like, gee, I didn't know that clause was in there. Well,
Yeah.
you've got to do your due diligence. Another thing that you need to realize is, I think a few years ago, the cyber insurance companies jumped in and said, oh, this is great, we're going to make some good money off this, and now all of a sudden they're losing their shirt. So they're cracking down. So the information required today to obtain cyber insurance is much more complicated and thorough than it was. So they're asking a multitude of questions, and they're going to require you to have the protection, the tools, the security awareness, the training, et cetera, that we've talked about. They're going to require that you have that, and you better not push the boundaries on truth telling when you do this, because they'll deny your claim later. But they're really getting much more strict. The questions are 2 and 3 pages now as opposed to a handful.
So I would say we have about 950 mortgage companies that we support the IT infrastructure in the cloud right now. And I would say about 30% of them are sending us these questionnaires because they're starting to get cyber insurance now. And they want our help. You guys do all our IT. How can you help us? And so we've actually been encouraging them to send us their way, because the most important thing is that you answer these questions correctly and truthfully.
Yes.
You don't have to be perfect, but if an insurance company can find that you didn't do something you said you did and you got hacked, just like with any insurance company, they're going to not pay. So it's really important that you get that part figured out.
It is. You hit an important point, which is they're not looking for perfection, but they do want to see you're on this journey. And it is a journey. It's not you're not going to arrive and be done. It's going to be an ongoing process. What that brought to mind for me is what I've seen over the last 6 months helping my mortgage clients is now the state examiners, the auditors, Fannie Mae are all doing the same thing. And where it used to be we could throw our disaster recovery plan at them and they wouldn't even look at it. We'd just check all those boxes. They're actually going into much more depth and detail. Fannie Mae brought in IT experts to ask questions. I helped a company with a Fannie Mae More audit. It was the most extensive, detailed IT cyber review that I've ever been involved in. And I'm seeing that from Texas to Indiana, Arizona state examiners, same thing. So I'm sure you guys are hitting it now, but if not, be prepared. Same thing, you've got to be honest, you've got to be accurate, but they're going to look to see that you are on the journey.
Yeah, I think that's really true. We're seeing the same thing. So let's shift that to auditors and talk about those for a minute too. When you're trying to mitigate your cyber risk, part of that risk you're trying to mitigate too is getting, if you don't want to get hacked, but even if you don't get hacked, you don't want to be had by the regulators, right? Because they're going to make you pay too. That's going to cost. So they're going to be looking at, are you doing assessments? Are you, do you have cyber plans that you're working at protecting and defending? Do you have an incident response? Are you working towards plans like that? And I'll echo what Rob just said. What we're seeing too is they're bringing industry experts, IT experts with them in doing these audits. And in the old days, it was pretty easy. You gave them a stack of policies, and everybody got copies of their policies from other mortgage companies, and they traded them away, and this is what we do. Well, now they're actually doing more than that, as Rob said.
And they're requiring they're requiring assessments, they're requiring pen testing annually, and then they're also actually requesting that you test your DR plan and you provide proof of your test.
Right.
Yeah. So, okay. So here's a fun question, and if somebody wants to yell out the answer, we're going to give you 5 things that you can go back and talk to your IT folks about, talk to your company about, check to see if they're doing before we wrap this up. But what is the one thing you could do that would get 99.9% of account compromises blocked or stopped? Anybody, yell it out. Did I hear?
Yes.
Aha, right there. Okay. So I'm glad everybody knows this. I used to use a seatbelt analogy about multi-factor authentication, which is basically, the idea that you need to make sure that you have a secondary or a third way of identifying who you are. You get that code or a screen pops up and you click OK before you can get into your email. But there's some tricks that you need to know about multi-factor. They're not all the same, right? Mm-hmm. So as we move to the cloud and we do this, you have to turn off what's called legacy authentication. So you can have the multi-factor turned on, but if you have legacy authentication, the hackers just use an old version of Microsoft Outlook, and they get your password, and then they're into your email, and they've bypassed your MFA. So check with your IT that they do that. What's another one?
Train your team. Train.
I would echo training. That's, again, if you haven't figured it out, people are still where you're most vulnerable. So That's how the phishing attacks come in. That's what opens the door for the ransomware. Training, training, training. If you don't have security awareness training, you need to have it just to protect yourself. And again, coming back to the audits, they're requiring that. They want to know you have that in place.
So here's another quick one. Ask your IT team, are they doing basic geo-blocking, which is basically foreign countries, don't let your systems be accessed from those, don't allow foreign emails to come in. The other is get the modern cloud AI security, and there's some really great security. It'll give alerts letting you know if your account is being just got logged into in California, and then 20 minutes later it was logged into in Florida. Those are the sorts of things you want to make sure that they're there. And Rob, you just brought up the cyber awareness program, and that's really important. Test your end users, make sure that you're giving them fake phishing attacks on a regular basis. And then finally, get an assessment every year. And what an assessment does is lets you know where you're at. And what Rob was just saying with that before, which I think is important, is show that you're making improvements with these assessments.
And they can get a copy of this,
Yes,
right?
yes, you can get a copy of these, but ask
Sorry.
these questions to your IT folks.
Yeah, and get the assessment. I mean, you have to baseline where you're at today so you know that you're improving and you know what the most important priorities are to attack first.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's your code for a copy of it.
There it is.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay.